City of Cupertino Planning Commission of Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025. I hope you will join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam City Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Fung?
Present.
Commissioner Linskog?
Here.
Commissioner Scharf?
Here.
Vice Chair Kasolcharan?
Present.
Chair Rao?
Present.
All present.
Okay, very good. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes for the July 8th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting. If commissioners may take a look for a second, and then if I may have a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes.
And do I have a second?
Sure, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. If I may vote.
I think we have to vote by voice.
Oh, we have to
because
vote by voice. That's correct. Thank you, Commissioner Linskog. If we may do a voice vote, please, Madam City Clerk.
Absolutely. Commissioner Fung?
Abstain.
Commissioner Scharf?
Aye.
Chair Rao?
Aye.
Vice Chair Kasolcharan?
Aye.
Commissioner Linskog?
Aye.
The motion carries with Scharf abstaining,
I'm sorry.
with Fung abstaining.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. And moving on, we have no postponements, and so the next item on the agenda will be oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the Commission on any matter within the jurisdiction of the Commission and not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. In most cases, state law will prohibit the Commission from making any decisions with respect to a matter not on the agenda. For those that are new to attending the Planning Commission, if you wish to speak on items not on the agenda, now would be the time. You would want to fill out a blue comment card that's found to your right, and you may hand it to the City Clerk. Madam City Clerk, do we have any oral comments?
We have 8 speakers in person, and I see no hands raised remotely. Our first speaker is Vic Manor, followed by Pinaki Mukherjee, followed by Bindea Desar. Welcome, Vic.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to address the Planning Commission. My name is Vic Menon, and I'm a resident of Cupertino. The topic is the Tessellations Private School, located at the former campus of Regnard Elementary. We represent about 30 neighbors living in a quarter-mile radius of Regnard campus. We live on the streets that are most impacted by Tessellations' current CUP. To the neighbors who are present tonight, please raise your hands. Thank you. We want to express our concerns about the current CUP for Tessellations. Also, we understand that the school may soon request permission to revise its CUP by expanding its enrollment cap by over 40%, from 300 to 425. It may also seek permission to complete its high school by adding 3 grades. We think both of these revisions would further hurt our neighborhood and the broader community, especially parents with kids in local schools. I'd like to cover some background first. CUSD operated Regnard Elementary for 60 years as a public neighborhood school. It was originally K through 6, but later became K through 5, to provide children with a structured transition between elementary, middle, and high school. Regnard closed on June 30th, 2022. Beginning in February 23, Tessellations leased the campus from CUSD and began operating in August 23. Tessellations opened without the required CUP, but it was retroactively granted by the city in December 23. The CUP sets an enrollment cap of 300. Under municipal code, Tessellations would have been required to provide 148 parking spaces for its staff, parents, and visitors. However, the school has less than half this number on its campus footprint. So Tessellations negotiated a parking exception from city requirements by including up to 81 spaces at the New Life Church via a shuttle system. Several of us are going to speak today. Our next neighbor will cover the initial implementation of the CUP. Thanks.
Thank you, Vic. Our next speaker is Pinaki Mukherjee, followed by Bindaya Desar, followed by Ravi Kumar. Welcome, Pinaki.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Pinaki Mukherjee. I'm a resident of Cupertino, and I'll discuss the initial implementation of the Tessellation CUP. Tessellation did not have a previous operating history on the former Regnet campus, and no one knew what to expect. In the end, Tessellation was given the go-ahead to operate within clear, generous limits. As school began, however, strong neighborhood concerns about staff parking on local streets emerged. Attempts to work things out directly with Tessellation were refused, and we submitted an application for permit parking that was granted by the city. The application included a petition supported by over 80% of neighbors on the surrounding streets. Shortly afterwards, Tessellation resolved the parking problem by adding about 20 parking spaces to its blacktop. Since the neighborhood preferred not to have the hassle of permit parking, it withdrew its application. Notably, the CUP issued in December 2023 specifies that the school will pay for the installation of a permit parking zone in the future if permit becomes a public nuisance. The next neighbor will cover why we are speaking to the Planning Commission today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pinaki. Our next speaker is Bindaya Desar, followed by Ravi Kumar, followed by Bonnie Libby. Welcome, Bindaya.
Hi, I am Bindaya Desai, resident of Cupertino. I will discuss why we are speaking to the Planning Commission today and introduce traffic concerns regarding the CUP issued in December 2023. When asked 2 years ago if the school had plans to expand beyond 300 students to between 300 to 500 students, the head of the school told the city council, quote, "Not on this site, no ma'am. In terms of our philosophy, we don't really want any more than 300 students, just for a kind of safety and emotional comfort with each other," unquote. 2 years later, enrollment was nearly doubled from 141 to 268, well within its enrollment cap. Nonetheless, there are now significant traffic issues that were not known when the enrollment cap was set. Therefore, we are asking Tessellations to work with the city and neighbors to fix the current traffic problems. Tessellations must uphold its philosophy by limiting enrollment to 300 students, ensuring both safety and emotional well-being of its gifted population. Next, traffic concerns. Tessellations generates a disproportionate amount of traffic because the vast majority of its students come from out of the area. Traffic is worse at certain times than others. For example, while queuing for pickup around 3 p.m., traffic to reach the Tessellations parking lot generally extends about a quarter line along Yorkshire Drive and can extend another quarter mile away up to the Rainbow Stelling intersection. In addition to neighborhood residents and Tessellations parents, the traffic affects parents driving their kids from Kennedy, Lincoln, and Monte Vista in order to get home or to go to after-school activities. The next neighbor will cover some specific traffic examples we encounter. Thank you.
Thank you, Bindaya. Our next speaker is Ravi Kumar, followed by Bonnie Livy, followed by Mira Nathan. Welcome, Ravi.
Hi, I'm Ravi Kumar, and I'm a resident of Cupertino. Let me share a few real concerns we have. First is traffic jams and blocked access. Next, we have a challenge with speeding and reckless driving. Third, we have a challenge with safety risks for our children. Let's begin with traffic congestion. While Tessellations parents slowly inch towards the school's pickup and drop-off zones, residents on streets like Yorkshire and Rainbow struggle to enter or exit their driveways. Drivers often can't turn onto streets like Belknap Drive because the traffic backup leaves no opening. Some resort to using the lane meant for oncoming traffic, creating serious safety hazards for both vehicles and pedestrians. One of our neighbors on Rainbow Drive even parks his car on another street just so that he could get out during school hours. This should not be necessary. Next, speeding and reckless driving. Next is the issue of speeding after school drop-offs or pickups. Many Tesselation parents exit via Folkestone and then drive on to Stafford and Sunderland, heading back to Rainbow. In their rush, some drivers speed excessively, again using the oncoming traffic lane. This has led to multiple near collisions at these intersections. And third is the safety to our children. Finally, we must talk about safety. A young boy biking to Kennedy Middle School was struck by a car at the corner of Yorkshire and Rainbow and almost broke his leg. While it may not have been a Tessellation's parent who hit him, the morning congestion and chaos certainly contributed to the danger. Public school kids on bikes and scooters dart through the traffic without pausing, and we have seen the consequences. To make matters worse, drop-off sometimes happens at the blacktop entrance near the fire lane, marked no parking at any time. Parents then make illegal U-turns as other neighbors are trying to leave for work. In the afternoon, pickups at the same blacktop entrance are equally risky. Parents make fast turns at a blind curve on Yorkshire, creating the real possibility of a head-on collision. The next speaker will cover some of the parking issues, but I wanted to highlight how these daily patterns are affecting our livability and safety of the neighborhood. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ravi. Our next speaker is Bonnie Libby, followed by Mira Nateson, followed by Carl Fung. Welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you. My name is Bonnie Libby, and I'm a resident of Cupertino, and I will discuss parking issues. As a private school, Tessellations has approximately twice as many teachers and staff per student compared to what was our neighborhood school, Regnart Elementary. Parking is therefore a significant issue, even though Tessellation's enrollment cap of 300 seems small compared to Regnart's enrollment. The current CUP requires Tessellations to provide 148 parking spaces for staff and visitors. Currently, the school says that none of its staff are now parking in front of residents' home, and I would agree they're really trying for this in this manner, and we appreciate this direction. However, of the total 148 spaces, 20 are located on the school's blacktop, which the neighborhood feels is a good thing because it takes 20 more cars parked all day off of our streets. In its proposed revision to its original CUP, Tessellations is asking for permission to close the parking behind the school and implement a shuttle system from parking at New Life Church. However, the shuttle system is unpopular with Tessellation staff, and there will not be any emergency buffer to fall back on. And honestly, I taught for the Cupertino schools for over 30 years, and as an elementary school teacher, no way would I be able to go at a certain time, meet at the church, get to campus, leave at a specific time with all of my materials. I think it's an untenable situation. I really do. 8 spaces meant for visitors are occupied by teachers. Visitors do not park on the blacktop. Instead, they park 3 to 4 hours in our neighborhood. As enrollment has climbed to 266 and traffic started backing up on Rainbow Drive, 20 to 25 parents do not join the drop-off pickup line. Instead, these so-called dropouts park in the neighborhood on a regular basis. These numbers have been increasing due to worsening school traffic. They create pedestrian hazards as kids are walking among all the traffic. Tessellations has just 1 traffic director, and it's really not enough. We estimate that Tessellations needs 7 traffic directors to manage both traffic and dropouts. Event parking deserves a special mention as well. In its CUP, Tessellations plan to park 100 cars on the blacktop for 7 large school events per year with help from a traffic director. This system was followed in 2024, but it was really forgotten in 2025. For multiple events, 30 cars have been parking on Yorkshire Drive, not the blacktop, between 4 and 9 p.m. Tessellations must ensure that event parking occurs within its campus footprint. Tessellations informs the city about these events, therefore we request the city to monitor compliance. Thank you, and the next neighbor will cover high school.
Thank you, Bonnie. Our next speaker is Mira Nateson, followed by Carl Fong, followed by Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Mira.
Thank you. My name is Mira Natesan, and I'm a resident of Cupertino. I will discuss high school regarding the tessellation CUP. We ask that tessellations stick to the high school plans outlined in its original CUP. Tessellations was emphatic that it would move to another site in 2025. From the second page of a key document in its CUP application, quote, in August 2024, tessellations will add a 9th grade with the intention to add an additional year of high school each year for the following 3 years. The high school will be moved to another site after the first year. In the city's public video recording of the CUP hearing 2 years ago, the head of school emphasized this intention by telling the city council, we have plans to build a high school on another undetermined site, unquote. When asked where tessellations would grow, he told the city council during the same meeting, quote, there are plenty of spaces available, so the idea of finding another suitable and permanent space for our school seems like not one of our large problems at the moment, and we will solve that when the time comes, unquote. If the high school is allowed to stay, traffic problems will accelerate. Located at the site of an elementary school, tessellations cannot offer a full range of laboratories, sports teams, and extracurricular activities without transporting students and generating traffic. Also, residents do not want high school students driving to school and then parking on neighborhood streets. Any parent contracts signed to the contrary are not binding. Furthermore, the streets surrounding an elementary school are not easy for new drivers. Instead of moving the 9th grade as promised, Tessellation's revised CUP proposes to expand to grades 10 through 12. This expansion must be disallowed. Residents want Tessellations to follow its original plan to move out 9th grade in the fall of 2025. It can accommodate its high school students at New Life Church on a temporary basis. The next neighbor will cover monitoring and the conclusion.
Thank you, Mira. Our next speaker is Carl Fong, followed by Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Carl Fong, and I'm a Cupertino resident. I'll be presenting the topic of monitoring, concluding with our key takeaways for tonight's neighborhood presentation. Monitoring. In response to Tessellation's application for its initial conditional use permit, the city suggested that Tessellations consider modeling, parking, and traffic solutions in practice by other private primary educational institutions such as Challenger and Stratford. These cities where these institutions reside in have zero tolerance policies that are enforced by local law enforcement. These policies require that the private institution to operate on the footprint limited to its campus that includes no standing traffic lines and no parking on any street at any time. We're not proposing any specific solutions in this forum, but suggesting that active monitoring and enforcement is required as part of Tessellation's conditional use permit. For example, when Regnart was in session, the Santa Clara County Sheriff would monitor the situation, make frequent rounds, keep safety, traffic violators, and illegal parking in check. Program monitoring enforcement by the city or enlisting the service of the sheriff would achieve the same success and effect. Key takeaways. We recommend that the conditional use permit restrict the student enrollment not to exceed 300. The school projects an enrollment of 277 for the upcoming school year, and that gives plenty of time for Tessellations to actively implement solutions to mitigate any traffic and parking issues due to the student enrollment expansion. Also, we insist that Tessellations revert to its original plan to serve only grades K through 8. The head of school said that Tessellations would close 9th grade in the fall of 2025 and move to another campus. The school had nearly 2 years to find a new high school campus, as promised, but failed to make good on their commitment. We cannot allow Tessellations to perpetuate their lack of follow-through in the future at our neighbors' expense. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Our next speaker is Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer.
If there was another speaker, I didn't want to break up their sequence from the neighborhood. Oh, no, we're finished. You're finished? Okay. All right. Can you start me back at 3 minutes? Thank you. Hi, I'm Jennifer Griffin. Actually, my husband went to Regnart. I was listening to this before. I wanted to talk tonight about SB 79. This is Senator Wiener's retake on SB 50, which is basically supposed to try to upzone and allow high-rises to be built 1/4 mile and 1/2 mile off of transit corridors in any city and county in the state. I have been concerned that Stevens Creek Boulevard was one of these transit corridors. I'm a member of 3 of the activist groups fighting against 79, and they had agreed that my house would most normally be. Well, I saw the bubble maps today for Cupertino, for Stevens Creek Boulevard. My house is within 1/4 mile of Tier 1, which means that they can build up to 8 stories. Now, you talk about legislation without representation. That started the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution. I know it sounds trivial, but this is legislation with no registration, with no representation, 0. We have not been able to vote on this in 6 years. We're not going to go down lightly. When I saw my house on that map, it just focused me laser on this. There's a lot of things that are going on politically in federal that I'm upset about, and I'm very, very upset about what is going on with our governor and some of our legislators. And I am, you realize, okay, I have said before, my ancestors lived in Virginia and South Carolina 200 and something years ago. You know, they were British citizens, but members of the family were actually attacked and killed, and a 4-year-old was shot in the cabin, and after that, they decided to fight in the war. Now, that may seem trivial, but when you talk about how average citizens survive 6 years of not being able to vote on things that are taking over and eroding control in their neighborhoods, they take up their time. I have 2 elderly parents that we want to take care of. You know, we live our lives, but I don't want to fight Scott Wiener. What does Scott Wiener care about my house in Cupertino? I called Buffy Wick's office today and unloaded on them. This is legislation without representation. It is time to have the Boston
Thank you,
Tea
Jennifer.
Party again.
That is your
Thank
time.
you.
We have no speakers in person and no hands raised remotely, Chair.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. I did want to ask a couple of clarifying comments to staff before we lose the tessellations residents out here. When is this item likely to come for hearing, if there is any such timeline in mind that staff may have?
There is no such timeline, sir.
Okay, and then will this item be coming to the Planning Commission?
When the item is ready to be heard, yes.
And would the Planning Commission recommend a position to the council, or is the Planning Commission the final body?
It is the final body unless that decision is appealed.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I believe on the existing conditions of approval, any kind of violations need to be reported to the city. This is not something the city monitors, but certainly if reported, that is something that the city would consider. Is that right?
Yes, depending on the code enforcement staffing and availability of time and prioritization, yes, they will be out there.
And so residents would be encouraged to both be abreast of the conditions of approval and work with city staff to file 311 tickets so that code enforcement is having a record of any conditions of approval that may have been potentially violated. So that's something that residents may want to keep an eye for. And is there anything else staff would like to comment on this?
Not at this time.
Okay. I know I have a commissioner urging to.
Yeah.
Yes. So very briefly, please.
Right. I just want to ask staff, changes to the CUP have to come to planning. They can't be approved administratively. Is that true?
It depends on the kind of CUP that is being proposed or amended. That's spelled out in the municipal code. However,
Okay.
in this one in particular will have to come to the Planning Commission.
Okay. You mean to expand the numbers or to add high school? Or
Correct.
both?
Both.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That was my question.
Thank you. Once again, for the residents, we cannot comment on items that are not on the agenda, so I believe staff have provided some clarifying comments. Thank you to staff for doing that. I encourage residents to continue to collaborate with staff and provide your input there. Thank you. And so with that, we will be moving on. I also want to remind residents that oral comments are to be on matters within the jurisdiction of the commission. And so certain topics may not be within the jurisdiction of the commission. So it's something to keep in mind. So the next item on the agenda moving on is the study session. We're going to be looking at the study session on sample objective design standards. Is there a report from staff?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Planning Commission. Tonight we have here our consultant. Actually, we have Greg here who will be presenting on behalf of PlaceWorks, who is our consultant working on the Objective Design Standards project. We commenced on this project in conjunction with the amendment and adoption of the housing element, and as one of the items of the housing element, development and adoption of objective design standards was one of the items on that list of things and obligations that we have in our housing element to comply with those obligations. So with that, I will pass it on to Greg.
Am I on the mic now? It sounds like it. All right. I do have a presentation that I'll go through tonight. Agenda, I'll give a quick background to the project again to reintroduce you to what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then I want to explain why we did this sample objective design standards process and why we're showing you what we're showing. We'll go through some of those sample objective design standards. You have all of them in your packet, of course. And then I have a few questions for the Planning Commission to talk about and to offer future guidance for the next step.
Were you sharing something on your screen?
Oh, I'm sorry, am I not? Yes, I am. Sorry, I haven't used this system.
I think that's it. It should be on there, yeah.
Sorry about that. That's okay. All right, you all seeing that agenda slide now?
No, I can't see it. Oh, now I can see it. Yep.
All right. Thank you for the help. All right, a quick project welcome to make sure that we all know who's working on the project. Well, of course, we're working with Luke and Pew in the planning department. I'm Greg Goodfellow, a senior associate at PlaceWorks. I've been managing this project. And Charlie Knox is our principal. He's not here tonight, but he's also been a big part of this process. And of course, multiple staff members, planning and graphics at PlaceWorks have been helping us out. Once again, the city is in the process of developing objective design standards, what we call ODS, for all types of multifamily and residential mixed-use development projects. Tonight, the study session has two goals. One is to review the sample ODS developed in response to the input we heard on May 13th from commissioners. And second, to solicit additional commissioner feedback on the content, the graphics, the formatting, and ultimately the direction of the administrative draft objective design standards document. A quick background review of objective design standards. Once again, we know that housing is a challenge in California. There's an insufficient supply of housing. Housing is unaffordable. There are ongoing construction challenges, of course, from the interest rates to construction costs to union and labor challenges. The major response by the state of California has been legislative, and that legislation really has two themes, which is one, that California needs multifamily housing more than single family, and that discretionary review based on subjective guidelines constrains production and needs to be streamlined. And again, a common provision of that theme and of the multiple laws that have been put in place is that subjective criteria cannot be used to deny multifamily housing. Again, this has been a statewide response. There are many laws that require the use of objective criteria to deny housing. SB 423, 330, 167, Senate Bill 6, Assembly Bill 211, And I pulled this quote again out of Senate Bill 330, the Housing Crisis Act, because it really states and sends home the meaning of these laws, which is that cities can't disapprove a multifamily housing project, including through design review, unless that project is shown to be inconsistent with objective, quantifiable standards. And again, this all leads back to this new definition of what an objective design standard is that was originally laid out in Senate Bill 35. And don't quote me on this, but it really comes down to an ODS is a standard that involves no personal or subjective judgment and is uniformly verifiable to an external benchmark. In other words, a standard that involves a quantity, a true-false statement, a list, something that that can easily be quantified and that a reviewer can easily determine is a project is consistent or not with. The types of development that are applicable, that ODS are applicable to all multifamily residential projects. This includes townhomes, which of course are becoming more and more common in the Bay Area, and all residential mixed-use projects with at least 30% residential square footage. The types of development that are not subject to objective design standards that still can be reviewed through subjective design guidelines are single-family homes, projects on non-infill sites, projects that are on hazardous sites, that are on natural resources, wetlands, or that will have historic impact. Again, these are the types of projects that would be called out in a CEQA review. In other words, let's not streamline review of any project that may have an environmental impact. Once again, this is sort of the proposed outline of a potential objective design standards document that we created for Cupertino. I'm bringing this up for you now because as we go through the sample standards, and I'll get into this more, because we develop these standards based on some of the design priorities we heard from you, you're not seeing them in the organization that they might take within the actual document. And so in your packet, you'll see that I did place the standards under the headers that they may go into, but I still think it's nice for all of you to be reminded that the standards would, of course, go into a very organized document with chapters, sections, and subheaders. And so when you're reviewing these, keep that in mind, that these are based on your priorities, not organization of the final document. All right, the process of how we got to tonight. So on May 13th, our last study session, the commissioners, thank you very much, provided us with some great feedback on objective design standards. We talked about the general approach. Should they be very prescriptive or more flexible? I shared some insights from the legal community about the fact that ODS should never get too prescriptive. It makes them harder to follow, and developers are more tempted to waive them. So what's important is to really hear a local community's priorities and focus in on those elements. And the commissioners seem to agree that let's avoid standards that are too prescriptive. We talked about overall benefits and impacts of residential design on quality of life. That was our way of trying to understand and get further at your priorities for residential design in the community. We talked about some responses to recent design trends, and you've got some names of developments, which was helpful for us to look at, and then looked more straightforward at local design priorities and direction. From all that, and I summarized all of that feedback in attachment to the staff report, we pulled out, working with staff, 5 design priorities and decided, all right, let's develop some standards in response to those. And the idea here, of course, was also that commissioners made clear that you'd like to be a little bit more involved in the incremental steps of the process. So we thought this was a good way to, next slide. First of all, what are those 5 priorities I pulled out with staff? First is to ensure new buildings are sensitive to surrounding low-density residences, and that includes to the front and back and sides. Ensure that new surface parking and loading areas are sensitive to surrounding low-density residences, to minimize the privacy impacts to adjacent residential development, prevent the dangerous transition to what's often called a concrete jungle or a heat island with inadequate trees and greenery, and then finally to activate retail visitation and promote walkability, which we tend to think of as paired priorities. Both rely on the other. So the goals of this exercise, in addition to what I mentioned in offering commissioners an interim step to see how this process and how these standards may look, is to demonstrate how objective design standards can be applied to various priorities, is to allow the planning commissioners and the public to review various approaches and formats. Some of the standards are just text, some of them are plan-based drawings, others are axonometric 3D drawings. And finally, to introduce the ways in which ODS may be organized into topical sections. So again, taking that structure slide that we looked at previously, and dropping these standards into those sections. And now we'll do a review of some of those samples. I don't have them all on this presentation, but we can bring them up if needed. Again, they're all in your packet, of course. So that first priority was ensuring that buildings are sensitive to surroundings. This is a standard for side and rear upper floor setbacks. Again, this is less common in ODS in that step backs are common throughout ODS documents. I would assume they will be in this document as well, but what's less common are step backs specific to side and rear. So this was our way of okay, the council's or the commission has made clear that it's not just the front that matters, it's neighbors looking at what might be an unattractive stucco facade. So one step could be to integrate these step backs. And so obviously these are all quantitative, the 20 feet and the 2 vertical feet and the 6 feet and the 70% facade length. These are all exemplary of objective design standards and are integrated into the graphic. Another standard is for rear modulation. This is also something you'll see across objective design standards, is this idea of modulating facades to make them, to increase visual interest and to avoid this volume-based mass that is just unfriendly to look at. But again, this is not something that is always in ODS, is applying this to the rear. And I think this is a great idea. And again, I think this came from a commissioner input that it's not just the front that matters, it's what about the homes to the back? And so we can add those modulations to the back as well. Again, these are all potential approaches, as we made clear in the staff report. Daylight plane is also a common one because it simply works, and it simply is, it's been used in development standards for years, but it really is important. And what I tried to do in this one is sometimes when you look at that daylight plane graphic, a lot of times to the uninitiated, it's a strange graphic. What exactly is this showing? And so what I wanted to impress upon readers is that it's that dark yellow triangle. Using that angle is the area where you actually can't build. Usually it will just show a potential shadow impact, but I like the idea of making very clear where a building, where the no building or the no build area is, in order to prevent that shadow impact to a surrounding or a nearby residence, adjacent residence. Finally, we heard from the commission about the importance of facade wrapping. This I thought was a great idea, the idea that let's bring those elements from the front and wrap them around the back for this uniform application of elevations. And again, this is to further avoid that blank stucco or boring facade that somebody on a second floor home has to look down upon. This is an example of a standard, of course, that's just text-based. And then, you know, paired with that would be bringing, in a more explicit manner, elements of the facade to the side and rear. Window heads and sills that align horizontally with those in the front, and then bringing at least one of the following decorative elements. This, of course, can be tweaked. It could be 2 of the following 5 elements. These are all examples of potential front decoration that can be brought to the back. Light fixtures could be potentially a craftsman-style fixture that was used above porches. Maybe instead of a blank bulb that would typically go above a parking area, no, let's bring that decorative element to the back. Things like that. Priority 2 was sensitive parking and loading. This is an example of a standard where we integrated a sort of a comprehensive graphic with the basic measurements and pulled them into the text and added some additional standards. Staff gave us good feedback on tree heights, et cetera, to make sure that they match existing zoning. And again, this is where, you know, you have a wall height, but let's make sure the design is even further spelled out. a solid masonry metal construction colored to match the primary building. The landscape buffer, of course, and the covered parking element. The idea here is that it may be, this again is depending on review and how we tweak this based on community and commissioner and council input, but it's a common desire to see a covered parking if you're looking down on it from a neighboring structure. This is another example that comes up in a lot of objective design standards, and there are different ways to go about it. But solid waste facilities are always an issue of design, and there have been many ways to make sure that those facilities are enclosed and covered in a way that makes the rear area look better and sited in a way that is safer. And again, that's why we've included that location standard for a 60-foot radius outside the nearest entry. And then, of course, the screening elements enclosed on all four sides with an access gate, a roof that provides clearance, and the use of at least two materials that are used on the primary structure. Privacy impacts. This is really where we heard specifically about the potential use of offset windows, and these are two examples of how you can go about that. And really this comes down to ensuring that sight lines, that windows are offset enough that the sight lines aren't going from window to window, as spelled out in these graphics. Before I go on, I should say that although it's not in this presentation, we looked at balconies, of course, which are can be a big privacy issue. And this is one example of the Cupertino zoning code being pretty comprehensive. Unlike a lot of zoning codes, it has some very specific standards for balconies in terms of spacing and location. And so this was in a place where we need to be careful about not repeating the zoning code too much. And I actually removed some of the potential approaches to balcony privacy because of existing standards in the zoning code. Priority 4 was this attempt to ensure that all areas of development have tree cover in this move to avoid the concrete jungle. This is a standard for street trees in the sidewalk landscape zone. This is important to note that this references back zones of the sidewalk. So this is another example of something that in this presentation of sample standards, because they're in response to your priorities as opposed to organized together, it's important to remember that references to other other standards would be provided in all these cases, certainly to the landscape zone and the zones of the sidewalk. This is, now we're getting into the private area, the open space. This is a standard for physical focal point landscaping. And this is really more about public open spaces, common open spaces in mixed use and multifamily development projects. And moving on to retail and walkability. In objective design standards, it's important to remember that this is not a retail plan. We can't change the location of uses or the where certain uses are allowed. Retail and commercial uses and mixed uses are set in the general plan land use map. So what objective design standards can do is make those ground floor commercial uses of mixed use development as attractive as possible in their entryways, in their glazing of the lower floor, in the height of the ground floor ceilings, and things like that. So these are just examples of approaches that can be taken. The ground floor finish level and the ground floor height, make sure that those ground floors are taller than the second floor and above. Make sure that ground floor retail is open and has a significant amount of window and glazing space. So this is 60% transparency between 2 and 8 feet above sidewalk level. Of course, we can tweak those numbers. In ODS, you'll see anywhere that I've seen, it could be anywhere from 50 to 90%. Depends on the city. Most cities don't include that 2 to 8 foot level, but this is something that, an example of how we can tweak horizontally and vertically. And of course, the entry should be welcoming. One part of this that we heard from staff that I think is great is the idea that let's make sure that entries to commercial uses don't get blocked on the inside by trash cans, or that businesses aren't covering up one whole door with sale posters or things like that. So we wanted to ensure that primary entries, and this is B, shall provide full ingress and egress during business hours, including unobstructed movement of all doors. That's a small standard that can really ensure a more welcoming business and can make a difference in ground floor retail in a mixed-use building. So again, these are just samples of approaches that we can take. Okay, and moving on to discussion, and these questions are in your staff report as well. We've created these 4 discussion questions to talk about these sample standards. And the first one is really about your general response. To what degree are the standards consistent with your expectations regarding content, level of prescriptiveness, and topics? I'll open it up to commission.
Is this your last slide?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to start with some clarifying questions first.
Okay.
Actually, several questions come to mind, so we'll try and rotate through this. But my first question is for staff. Have staff had reviews between the last Planning Commission hearing and this one? And can staff comment on what are the key changes that were input from staff on the direction that the Placeworks team is taking?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I see people's faces? Because all I see is the slide right now. Thank you.
I'll try to the degree I can. Staff had input throughout on this. I don't know that I could think of many specific examples, but we reviewed the documents in their entirety, and where things needed to be clarified or where there were certain city standards already in place, we provided that input. But I don't have a lot of specifics on exactly what comments we provided to get the document to where it is tonight.
So is there materials that staff are viewing in your interactions with Placeworks on this topic that Commission is yet to see, as in draft that is already in progress, that you may be providing input on that we have yet to see?
No, what you have tonight is as far as this is. This is as much as we've seen ourselves.
Okay. And is it, for the material that is shared today with the Commission, is that something that staff have already provided input on? The draft that was shared at Commission today?
If I may, the standards that you see tonight are just sample standards. They are not intended necessarily for adoption by the city as is. These are just to, as Greg had on his slides, to get some direction on Planning Commission in terms of, is this kind of what you're expecting to see for these topics? The topics that were selected were ones that the commissioners seem to agree on in terms of their importance. And so those 5 subject areas, I believe, were selected so that we could show you a spread of objective standards that could be implemented in those areas, just to get initial feedback on what do you think, what more do you think that we need to go more in depth or what have you before we kind of present a public draft for review and adoption.
Is the eventual structure of the draft that we will get going to be a red line or an annex or an appendix to existing master plans, specific plans, or existing Title 19?
No. It would probably be a standalone design guideline booklet, which will reference, where this document is intended to guide citywide housing development project objective design guidelines for housing development projects. It does not dictate zoning. It does not dictate any other standards like density. This document only is intended for design. There may be language in this document that cross-references other documents, such as the heart of the city, where we have very specific standards in some areas, to say that if there is a conflict between this document and HOC, the HOC standards apply in the heart of the city. So there will be integration of those documents in some manner.
Do we know if other cities have taken the approach that you just described, or have they taken an incremental approach to existing specific plans that may exist in the cities?
Many cities have specific plans that they adopt for areas. They kind of do area master plans. They do specific plans. They do several different things. But as far as objective design standards go, they kind of, the way that we've seen it, and maybe Greg can speak to it as well, is that this document kind of stands on its own with cross-references.
Yeah,
but Greg?
No, I'm sorry.
Luke.
I just wanted to add to the specific plans are, in a sense, a relic of when things were discretionary. So they have a lot of standards in there. We have specific plans, but I haven't seen a city that has got their objective design standards within that. I think that, again, this is a fairly new thing the last few years, mostly in response to all the housing laws. So the reason we're doing this is to have it citywide for multifamily housing. I think, like Pew said, where we have a specific plan like HOC, that's going to essentially trump this. The standards defined in there are remaining those standards, but they're not necessarily objective design standards. So this is looking to apply very generally citywide to multifamily housing. It's going to have to work in conjunction with the zoning ordinance, specific plans, and the general plan. I do know there are cities that have incorporated odds into their zoning ordinance, though. So there's a lot of ways you could structure it, but the intent of this, again, was to apply citywide to multifamily housing because our housing element sites are, while a lot of them are in Stevens Creek, they're also in neighborhoods, too. So I think that's also borne out by a lot of your comments about privacy protection, to try to get that into neighborhood areas that if these were just, say, on a major corridor, we might not be addressing that as much.
I will pause to yield to other commissioners, and I will come back with more questions. So we have Commissioner Sharp.
With density bonus, they could waive any of these objective design standards, correct?
And it's very likely that these will all be waived if they conflict with the developer's project. That is true.
And it seems like almost every project coming forward for multifamily is a density bonus project.
If it's not 100%, it's going to be really close. 5
Right.
units or more,
Right,
it's
right.
going to be a density bonus
It only
project.
needs to be, what percentage does it need to be?
Anything or BMR?
5%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So if essentially our BMR requirements pretty much kick things into
Right,
a density
exactly.
bonus.
Yeah. So
I can also clarify as far as the approach. It is true that, for example, Sunnyvale has its own ODS package. You know, it's a very well-designed document with chapters and sections, whereas Palo Alto just dropped their objective design standards into the zoning code. And, you know, they're much more straightforward. They are much more typical of a zoning document, but they start with a subjective list of bullet points. Here's why we're doing these things for this subject matter, and then they drop in a series of standards, mostly with graphics. Most graphics typical of what I've shown you, because those are typical of all objective design standard graphics. And that's why in a document like this, in any ODS document, you won't see anything about height, anything about setback, anything about easements or things like that, because those are zoning code standards. These are not zoning standards. And it is difficult, and that's why, you know, although we wanted to show you these samples, I do think when you see it all together, it may make more sense, and that's why I wanted to keep this slide of the organization of the document up for you, because it will open with this purpose chapter where we lay out what this is, what it is not, its relationship to existing documents. This can't all be the case, it doesn't have to be, but these are some of the things that I've seen. And then you get into chapter 1, mixed use and multifamily, guiding statement for what this is, and then it breaks it down into site design, building form, etc. And then in our case, if you decide this is the route, chapter 3 is the smaller scale, which is, you know, the cottage style housing, duplexes, triplexes. And of course, the ultimate focus is going to be right onto townhouses here. And I think that's another reason why we selected some of these priorities, because I do feel, understandably, that a focus has been on townhouses and some of the parking lots behind them and the blank walls in the back. And I just want to impress upon the commission that amidst all the difficulty and the seeming why do it if everyone's going to waive it-ness of ODS, it is a chance to express design priorities It's difficult because that's the nature of objectivity, but it is a chance to do that, and that's what I think we were hoping to do, was to show here are some options for taking your immediate and qualitative priorities and turning them into something quantitative.
Right. And some developers will say, hey, we can do this, it's not a big deal, and some will be not like that.
Sure.
I had one other question. You said it doesn't apply to hazardous sites. So what is the definition of a hazardous site?
That would be if you're, let's think about CEQA, within certain distance from what the state-of-art term is a LUST, a leaking underground storage tank, or if it's a remediation site, probably nothing in Cupertino, honestly. It could be if there's a history of remediation on a site because there was a refinery or something like that. The point being that nobody wants to streamline a project, i.e., okay, you snap right past CEQA and see review for a project that could ultimately hurt somebody or put the public's health at risk or put a natural resource at risk. So no matter what, if you're near a wetland or if you're building over a vernal pool, no, you cannot just get your review streamlined. We need to look at these things.
I think that's true because CEQA is inherently discretionary.
Right.
So it makes you go through a discretionary process, and the purpose of these is to provide clarity to streamline development and also to get the city standards out there so developers in the community are aware of them as well. But CEQA was pretty much at odds with doing that. You want to do the analysis for CEQA.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I want to see if Commissioner Lindskog has questions. Want to recognize the remote commissioner if you'd like to.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think the challenge is exactly what's been discussed, right? It's like we want to provide guidance without becoming overly prescriptive, where they just go straight to a density bonus and bypass all of the guidelines that we offer. So I think you've done a really good job of providing this. I think it helpful to see what some of the other cities are doing, like you mentioned Palo Alto, like if there's any and maybe this is something you can send to us after the meeting, but what you consider gold standards or well done documents by other cities that have been shown to actually be used rather than bypassed at a greater rate. That would be really good to get a sense for that. Prior to when we actually see real documents that we need to vote on. Thanks.
Okay, one bit of insight I can offer into that is there has been a transition in the approach of ODS. When the law was first passed, objective design standards were seen as an architectural effort in order to really transfer design priorities and guidelines into a very sharp, detailed architectural document. And I know that what occurred is more and more waiving occurred and more resistance from architects and developers in terms of the financial impacts of certain standards and things like that. And ODS have moved more and more towards the idea of less prescriptive and easier to follow. And this is why, you may get a city like Palo Alto who has simply dropped it into their zoning code. Their objective standards are not poorly written by any means, but I think the idea is it's almost an aesthetic saying this is part of zoning now, this is part of the process. Whereas there are also very good cities, we did them, so take this with a grain of salt, but Sunnyvale standards are much more detailed, and they bring, we heard from their commissioners and their public that bird safe guidelines were very important to them, and they had already had historically from the 70s to the 90s, 3 very detailed documents about bird safety. And so we created a chapter on bird safe guidelines that were taken very well and that have been used, and that have not been resisted. And I've heard good things as we've checked in about use of the ODS. So I don't think there is, although I think there's been a movement away from overly prescriptive, overly architectural standards, I think it's just important to find a balance. And I do think, and this is what I hope came across, it's important that we hear local priorities and try to at least address those as best as possible. I think that's really all that can happen with these standards. And unfortunately, the legal background, and we haven't even talked about changes in CEQA and how that might change things, the whole process. but this is the best approach, I believe, at this point. And again, what I want to hear from you today is even just on the aesthetic level, when you look at things like this, do you see a package like this? Do you agree with that? Do you like more the idea of simplifying it into black and white drawings only, or keeping it more to text? Do you like the idea of inserting it into a zoning standard and making it more of a, of a code-based concept? That was my hope in presenting these things to you in the way that I did.
Yeah, and I will just briefly respond to that. I think it would be good to see more on what the other cities have done coming into these sessions or being shared asynchronously, because I think kind of sitting here, seeing materials just a couple of days before the sessions, not knowing how much input staff has had on the material coming into these sessions, I don't think this body is sort of in the position that we can give you sort of binding directional guidance that becomes sort of the codified standard going forward. We'd like to see what other cities have done, and then be able to derive what makes sense in our context based on some of those examples. So the more you can share, the better it is. There's probably public standards out there, but there's also probably some insights that you would bring from a subject matter perspective on how those have played out during the process and after.
Sure.
So that's my feedback. And then if other commissioners or I think the vice chair would like to go next.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. I actually have looked into some of our neighboring cities' ODS, and I tried to look at only the ones that were approved recently in like 2025, because I'm assuming anything previous to that was not relevant to the landscape that we're in today. So I think based on what I've seen with local cities, I think as you mentioned, Palo Alto and Sunnyvale have more recently approved ODS. I think that this does do a good job of kind of balancing being a little bit less prescriptive and a little bit less architecturally driven. And thank you for also incorporating our feedback. I see a lot of it has been woven in. I think our priority is really just to make sure that as much as possible, we encourage new developments to be following these standards to the extent that we can. So, where are there opportunities to make this even simpler and easier? And one of the things I was noticing in both the Palo Alto and Sunnyvale codes, this is sort of a question, is the parking tree shade percentage is actually a part of the municipal code for both of those cities, and it's not part of the ODS. So I wonder, could we potentially slim this down a little bit and maybe migrate that one section out to the ODS or out to the municipal code? And interestingly, the requirements on shade for those were actually more percentage-based and not feet-based. So it was 50% for both Palo Alto and Sunnyvale. So I'm not saying that we need to go that route, but it was sort of a question that I wondered. And then something that we may want to consider on the shade front is also, do we allow for some solar in addition to just tree shade? But first of all, I guess, what are your thoughts on municipal code versus ODS on that topic?
First and foremost is they certainly can't be in conflict. And this is where, early in this effort, I did do a review of all of the city's existing design documents, starting at that upper triangle, the general plan, which of course is mostly subjective design statements and priorities, all the way down to the zoning code. And I think, certainly with staff, as we get into an admin draft with everything there, we'll have to review this against the code again, even though, because I can't keep up with everything in that code, and that's one of the values of it. But I think that is something we can do, is where we come across, or as we've moved towards an admin draft list of standards, maybe there will be some that seem more appropriate to go right back into the code. Now that's its own process in itself, though, and this is where I'm sure staff can attest, of revising the zoning code or changing the zoning code, and I don't want to put words in their mouth about the process, because that's not part of that wouldn't be part of my contract, and there is a separate process that would go into that. But that's not to say it's not acceptable. But I also think if the ODS are consistent and complement the zoning code, it's less of an issue. And I do think this ODS can be adopted by reference into the zoning code, not the whole thing, but 1A 2.6, all development has to follow the city's objective design standards with a hyperlink then to this document. It can be that, simple also.
Commissioner Fong?
Great. So one of the questions I had was, I think it was clear in the staff report that, that we were looking at these for form rather than content. I did have many comments on the content.
Okay.
I will submit those in writing or something separately. But this actually, a number of people have spoke about this. I think that one of the things that I definitely saw when I was looking at these samples were a lot of questions around, that there were things that were driven by the municipal code, and by making a separate document, it potentially creates some ambiguity about, what was the thing that applied. So I think you actually addressed that really well in this last one. If you do a Palo Alto style where the ODS is integrated into the municipal code, then you have, proximity helps. The other way to do it is by reference. So either of those are fine. I think that the ODS being able to stand somewhat alone definitely has value, but the problem is, and this was, I'll give one example here. It looks like the municipal code probably says that planted areas can have no more than 25% turf. I think that's the case. It was a little bit implied here about. So my kind of subjective comment is on that. If that is in fact the limit, then I think that the limit is too low for common areas or that kind of thing. But that would be one of the cases where in reading what was in the sample, and again realize this is not been through the entire discussion process. That those sorts of things, that would definitely send me off to try to go look up what is the turf limit for landscaping. Mm-hmm. And in particular, in the project we just looked at, the kind of Staples project, right? There was a specific area there which was intended kind of as a community area, and probably more of a grassed area as opposed to a landscaped area, which looks nice, but isn't something you would walk on. Right. So I think that I would actually raise that as a issue. I think there were a number of items, again, there were a lot of great concepts here. I would have specific comments about some of the details, and then it's just so let me illustrate with another one. There was an unusual in the sensitive design of the first section. There was a lot of mention here about the relative height of the rear facade relative to either the zoned height maximum or the existing height, and that's actually very different. So if you again take the Staples area, I can't remember the name of the street now behind that. Many of the houses are a single story. The limit for those R1 areas will certainly be 35 feet. And there's a big difference between a house which is, less than 20 feet and 35 feet. So that has a lot of effect on what you could build. So that would be an example, I think, of something where when this comes back, I would give an input that that's something that it probably ought to be one or the other rather than this or that, which would seem to be unclear to me.
Yeah, and I can attest to when I wrote that, that's why I added whichever is less. And my legitimately, that was my attempt to, show the commission we can make this as sensitive as possible. Yeah. If even if there's no building there, let's make sure that what gets built doesn't overpower what could get built. Yeah. But again, we can certainly
absolutely. And so, and I understand again, illustrating the concept. That particular one, I'd probably, when it actually comes specifically here for recommendation, I would probably fight that one. Yeah. Just to say, if you do that, are you going to say, okay, the person who had a one-story house but could have had a two-story house can now, after they've provided a limit on the other structure, can they not have a two-story? Can they not have an addition?
Even when Pew reviewed that, we had to reword it because it did have a lot of elements in it.
Yeah.
But again, I was trying to demonstrate, all of the steps we can take. Yeah.
But I think in general, if the alternative to looking at this document were, we'll go look in the municipal code, you will lose a lot of people's ability to really grok or comment on what's happening. So I think in that respect, I think it's a great tool. What you regularly see here, I think, particularly with some of the project, of course, if it's an SB 330 project, then it's waiving the limits anyway. But what happens is that people generally feel like, I have a busy life. It's hard to engage, and it's much easier to try to engage with a document, document of this style than to go and say, okay, I wonder what the municipal code says about this, right? And parking would be the great example where, I think a lot of people can look at a plan and say, I think there's something wrong with the parking, with the way that this has been done. But if you actually go to look at the municipal code, you'll probably be there for a long time trying to figure out what was okay and not okay. I wouldn't want to have. I was kind of curious about why are vertical walls not allowed on the parking structures?
Thank you, Commissioner Fung.
Yeah.
Were there any other questions anyone else had? I want to go to the public for public comments, and then we can continue questions if there are any public comments.
We have 2 speakers in person and 1 person on Zoom. Our first speaker is Jennifer Griffin, followed by Lisa Warren, followed by Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer.
And really quickly, for any first-timers here, if you wish to make public comment, there are blue comment cards in the front right. You can fill out a comment card and hand it to the city clerk. Thank you.
Good evening, City Council. I'll just start out and say
Planning Commission.
Planning Commission, yeah. I don't trust anyone anymore. I read through the objective design. I attended the City Council meeting. I empathize with the staff and PlaceWorks and everyone in the city trying to understand this additional assault against Cupertino. When you were talking about things that we had in the building code before, we worked on this years ago. I miscarried in 2005 during the Florida area ratio, one night after the City Council meeting, and we were doing Florida area ratio. We did all that. The reason why Cupertino has attractive buildings and homes is because of the work done by the public and the staff and the city councils and the planning commission for the last 15 years, probably 18, no, I'm sorry, since 2003. We care about the city, and we are perceptive about attacks and assaults against the city. This is what is happening. I perceive objective design as something that is being thrust upon Cupertino without any regard to what the public thinks about it. We have gone through this before. We will prevail. And I will just say right now, the lawyer may not think 79 has anything to do with it, but if it passes, you're going to have to rewrite this in January. Getting down to brass tacks about this, I'll just start out with a quote from the San Jose planner. The public is the subjective part that is a problem with objective design. I understand now why they don't want the public involved, because our voices are not fit to be heard. Well, I am sorry, they will hear us. Cupertino will break the mold on object design. If it hasn't been done before, by the time that is rehashed and straightened out and crushed and messed up by Cupertino, we will have broken the mold. That's what we did to Florida area. Look back in your notes. I have spent hours in here. I was the first person to speak in this building in 2002. We will prevail. My house is under assault. My neighborhood is under assault again, and it's been that way since I bought the damn house. I wish I had stayed a renter. We will prevail. Make sure on page 2 that when you're planting trees, they are not 2 feet from a 10-foot wall. It doesn't work. And
Thank you, Jennifer. That is your time.
We want adequate parking. We demand parking. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lisa Warren, followed by Sridhar, followed by Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. So, a lot to digest, yes, and redigest. something clicked in my head when you were showing priority 5. I don't even remember what the title is, but you were talking about the glazing on ground floor retail. And I just want to mention, then while I was scribbling notes down, you clarified something and I missed it, a percentage or something. But I want to point out Main Street as a good example of how the glazing on both sides of the retail in the front pieces and around the town square were meant to be open and inviting from both sides of the buildings. It was to attract people into restaurants or retail, whatever kind it was going to be, from Stevens Creek and the walkway and the this and that. Well, that didn't last a moment. There were, in some cases, very tacky paper put up in the glazing, and it's floor to ceiling. So I would hope that that is defined somehow very well, that you can't put in all glass and then cover it up with ads or paper, sometimes butcher paper looking stuff. I'd rather see a wall than have to look at something that looks unfinished or tacky. And I don't know, bird safe and dark sky and signage are all very important. And bird safe and dark sky, I'm assuming, are dealt with elsewhere and they have to follow that. I'd like that confirmed, that this doesn't need to have something in it for that. And signage as well, because signage is also very tricky and done after projects are approved. Then they start talking about signage, and it often detracts from what people were okay with the project to begin with, or excited about, either way. So those 3 items may have nothing to do with this, but I just wanted to bring them up. And the glazing is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Our next speaker is Sridhar, followed by Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Sridhar.
Hello. Thank you, everyone. I understand the comments from my fellow Cupertino resident. I've been here for the last 20 years. My experience with Cupertino is exceptional. And I moved from Milpitas 20 years ago. My daughter went to school here in Monte Vista. She, after that, went to NYU, graduated. She's back here. So for me personally, I want to tell you guys that I'm very, very happy to hear some of the comments that you're making and some of the work you're doing. And that I say specifically because for the last 5 years, I've been working with on an initiative called Valley to Valley, where we've been trying to connect Central Valley to Silicon Valley. So just 2 hours down south from here, you have a lot of very talented kids who are first-generation college goers that don't get any support from their parents because they are, maybe people working as truck drivers, etc. And I think the whole concept of multifamily development and having these objective design standards give an opportunity to people like that have grown up there. They want to come, collaborate with the Stanford, collaborate with the CMU, and pursue a better life, right? Today, what happens is, if you don't make housing more affordable and don't give an opportunity for people to come into the city, they're only 2 hours south of us, but they get 1/3 the salary as a kid in UC Berkeley, right? So for me personally, the last 5-6 years of working with some of these kids, bringing them to Stanford, mentoring them when my daughter was actually in high school, is a journey that started with her. But I feel that some of the multifamily projects that you're doing are making it possible for me to bring some of these kids, have them work with some Stanford children, and do well. So for my side, I just want to thank you for all the effort, and I think it's a movement towards the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Sridhar. Our next speaker is Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Peggy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Planning Commission staff and Questworks. Greg, first, I would like to ask that you post or upload Greg's slides after the meeting. And I like having, along the way, seeing the progress and being able to adjust. The Planning Commission has had great feedback, and I'd like that to keep keep continuing. I also liked the format. It was easy to read. I could read it and then look at the picture and clarify it. So I liked it. A couple things on page, and I sent an email with very detailed, specific comments on the different pages, but some of the highlight are light fixtures on the walls. Page 3, standard side and rear facade. I'm concerned about lighting. These are higher buildings and you're going to put lights all the way around it. As a neighbor looking at a big building next door, it would invade my night and potentially make it harder to go to sleep. Also, we have dark skies and I feel like nobody's listening. The schools have put lights on solar panels and it looks like an airport strip. So please, some lighting talk, add that. Noise has been a big issue in Cupertino. And as we add more people, we're going to have more noise. So like on the building facade, on the equipment, can you add noise dampening screening? The big air conditioners make a lot of noise on the roof. Can they be surrounded by noise dampening walls? Also, the wall between the neighbors and the new project, don't require it to match the primary building. What happens if it's red? The neighbor has a red wall all the way around. How about a natural color, light, a cream or a whatever? Anyway, let's see. I know I'm running out of time. On the windows, don't allow non-habitable rooms to have an exemption. Just say bathrooms and that's it. Keep it simple. And pollinator plant, maybe in the landscaping, would be nice. And also, again, noise dampening materials on the trash enclosure. They're going to be dumping trash all night. It would be nice for it to be quiet. And no artificial grass, but I don't know if you can say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. We have no speakers in person and no hands raised on Zoom, Chair.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. We will close public comments at this time and bring it back to Commission for questions if you have more questions. Anyone have questions?
So I believe right now there are standards for noise, right? Because I know a single family home putting in a new air conditioner, I think the city comes out and actually measures the noise to determine if there needs to be any kind of wall or buffer around it. Is that
right? So as part of the review of building permits for air conditioners or a new home that includes an air conditioner, we do review to make sure that the standards for the air conditioning unit meet our requirements for noise. And
So-
if it exceeds that threshold, then it needs attenuation.
And if it's multifamily and it's on the roof,
It's the same thing, yeah.
It still applies. Okay. And yeah, Peggy mentioned a thing about the trash enclosures, and I'm just thinking about the various vermin problems we've had in Cupertino recently with these stores. I know of 3 stores in Cupertino that were closed. One is still closed. So can we do some kind of vermin proofing of the trash bins, or is that like just impossible?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there's some sort of approach. I think this is where we need to assess. These are design standards. There's always a design approach to some other problem, and I understand there are going to be problems. This is where it's very easy, and trust me, you're not alone. Everyone who thinks about these things has the inclination to solve problems with them. But this is where standards can get very, very detailed and very, very broad and move beyond their original intent. So I do understand the idea of trash noise. I deal with it, but and it is your decision if you were to say, put a standard for noise attenuating walls around every trash enclosure. But again, that's expensive, and it moves away from design, and it does solve a problem, but it's something that the city and the commission and the council would really need to think about. How far into other problem solving do we want to take these objective design standards? And I think a good rule of thumb is to stay within design. And certainly, if you're going to review these other approaches, make sure we're looking at all other areas of regulation in the city. And, to make sure that noise is covered elsewhere, look into the municipal code in terms of, although based on what you're saying, it might not be working that well, vermin regulation. But I don't know that objective design standards are the best place to solve other problems that are not design related. And that's just in my experience of broadening out the standards too far.
Yeah, I mean, I can see someone saying, oh, well, this is a density bonus project. We don't have to care about vermin.
Right, that's another problem. The more you add in, the more people can waive.
Yeah.
So,
okay, thank you.
Just to echo that, these are design standards, and that's a lot of the comments we've gotten are veering off that. We had some written comments about banning palm trees, pollinator plants. Those things are all handled elsewhere or could be handled elsewhere. This is focusing on design.
Okay.
So vermin issues, noise issues, those are nuisance issues or issues that essentially have to be dealt with from a health perspective. But I would not want to try to use this as a mechanism to address those. I think
that's fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo that and say that, where you can provide us samples of what other cities have done or are considering, that provides a good set of guardrails so that we can stay within reasonable bounds on these things. Sure. I think it's also important that staff and the PlaceWorks team does not walk away with the thought process that what you come back with is going to be a union of everything you heard from everybody here. I think this collective body of residents and residents sitting on dais as commissioners are not necessarily subject matter experts on work that has happened and how it has played out. We are paying PlaceWorks to bring us material that helps us go through this process, both your draft as well as drafts from other cities and things that have passed. So please use the process to feed material into commission. And on that note, my question is, if we had input after this meeting, how should PlaceWorks be contacted?
I would be fine receiving it in a written form because I suspect some of you may have quite a bit of comments, and I think it would be good to try to capture all of that. I know one question I had as well too was on other cities' examples, was because I think that is valuable to try to give you, especially not different cities but different formats. Did somebody put it in the code? Did they have it as a standalone guideline? Is to ask you two is like, how would you like that information? Obviously you could read the entire document once you know it's out there, but if you wanted specific examples presented too, I mean, obviously we wouldn't want to present an entire city's guidelines. That would be just too unwieldy. But if there were specific examples you had so we could get you that information to kind of contrast, you could do it this way, you can do it this way, you can do it the following way. That would be good for us to know as well. And maybe that's something you need to think about as well, but I just want to be responsive to getting that concern addressed.
Yeah, and I want to also acknowledge that you have multiple commissioners. I believe Commissioner Fung brought up the fact that there's some parts of either the Mooney Code or other standards that may define a certain area, and this may conflict with that and how that resolves itself. And so I think this is an important topic, right? Understandability of the document is a factor, but it could also be an interim document that then feeds into the final format that may be codified, right? So I think it's reasonable to say, yes, we need, through this process, material that the public can understand and comment on and commissioners can comment on. But we also need, at the end of the process, a clear mechanism that one does not conflict with the other, and we have overlaps, and then decades of work that went into standards that the city already had gets overruled by something that we kind of came up through this process. I see PU shaking her head. I want to know what specifically will avoid that scenario.
Our review. Staff will be looking at the draft document and comparing those against the standards. That is the staff's role in the matter of preparing that draft document for the commission's adoption, review and adoption.
Sorry, go ahead.
If I could, I would actually, Commissioner Scharf actually brought up one of the items that I had commented on as well. There's shielding for mechanical that was covered in the ODS, but that didn't address sound. So that's a good example of, I looked at that and thought, okay, this must be governed by the Muni Code, but there ought to be a pointer I think that the thing that would be unfortunate is the missed reference, that when it went through review.
So that already exists. I mean, to the extent that, a developer is looking for standards for development, or, we're looking for standards for review, that already exists in the municipal code, right? I mean, zoning standards lay in the zoning document, noise standards are in Title 10. Stuff that Public Works looks at about streets and, street standards, how wide, et cetera, that's in Title 11. So that is something developers are also used to looking at in the development process. So it doesn't necessarily always need a pointer to it, but yes, we will certainly look at that and see where it makes sense to certainly do that. And part of our review will be to make sure that there are no conflicts, or where there are conflicts, to make sure that we work with PlaceWorks to make sure that that does not occur.
And I want to point out also that although a lot of or some of these may look like items in the zoning code, they are not. So screening of equipment, what's added in the objective design document is the specifics about using materials that are on the primary building. So that was an example of how you can expand so it's not in conflict with the code.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the 75% landscape buffer, which you pointed out. That may seem confusing, but that's specific to multifamily frontage zone areas. So that is an additional landscaping standard that is now in the zoning code and is less, and there's no way around it. It can be confusing, but I hope you can trust that based on our long review earlier of all of the design approaches from the general plan all the way down to the zoning code. And of course, in moving in the admin draft, Luke and Pew, who know this stuff by the back of their hand, would do a double check of what I do. That's simply the only process that we can do. And it's the process that is used on all objective design standards, because it is important to avoid those conflicts.
And I had a clarifying question on your slides. I think you said this applies to developments that are 2 units plus, but is the definition of multifamily 2 units plus, or is it 5 plus, or?
2.
It's 2 for multifamily and 5 for density bonus. So there is that little window in between where you could have a multifamily project that's 4 units. It wouldn't be eligible for a density bonus.
So
sorry, I interrupt. I've had my hand up for a while now.
Sorry, Commissioner Liskog, go ahead. Yeah.
Before we keep going down this path, because I'm going to forget everything I've been wanting to say. So a couple of things. One is on Luke, the point about the different options that other cities have looked at. Yes, it's definitely helpful to hear you can do it this way or this way or this way. But I guess from my perspective, I'm hoping for more guidance than just like presenting options, because again, you're the subject experts rather than us. So it would be helpful to get your perspective on Palo Alto is doing this right, Sunnyvale is doing that right, and we take the best of what the other cities are doing to create the strongest possible document we can. So it doesn't have to be completely prescriptive, but some sort of guidance from you as to what you think are best examples or best gold standard examples. That would be helpful. I think to Commissioner Fung's point. And Piu's response, I agree with Commissioner Fung. It's like, yes, it's not necessarily needed to have the cross-reference, but I do think it's helpful, even if we know that the developers are going to go through the municipal code and they know it by heart. It's still helpful for us to cross-reference that inside this as much as possible, so that they know that we've thought about it, and especially where we cross-reference it, that it's a particular point of emphasis for us. So for example, if it's bird safe or dark skies, the fact that or the canopy urban forest plan, once we have one, to be able to say in these design standards, like make sure to read the municipal code about bird safe and dark skies. That's an important piece of it. Make sure we have the proper glazing and windows and all that fun stuff. So I think that's important. Okay, thanks.
I think that's a good idea. And one thing that I've thought about, and what if each section just opened with a simple statement, relevant regulation in the city? Section 0.256 of the zoning code, chapter 6 of, I shouldn't have said it that way. So, each of the 2 or 3 to 4 bullet points, that's all it is, to make sure that both the reader and the content creator, myself, are held accountable and are reviewing those relevant items. And in response to your first comment, I will say that the way I've presented this format so far in this document is the way I feel is the best way to do it, which is this outline you've seen and this graphical approach with a separate package, because I do feel like that stresses and highlights the fact that this is a design document, not a zoning document. And it is not, I realize that by dropping it right into the zoning code, everything's together in one place. But at the same time, having everything dropped into that format of a web-designed, ugly municipal code limits the graphic approaches. It limits captioning. It limits text to graphic relationships. I really believe, and I think when you look at other examples, this is the way most cities do it. And I think this is the best approach, a standalone document. And I do feel like, having worked with Luke and Pew and looking at what's going on in this city, these 3 chapters, a purpose statement, which will address all of these, it's on this slide: legal background, definition of an ODS, the organization of this document, and the administration and review process. Then you get into the mixed use and multifamily. These are the larger projects. And then the small scale residential, these are, and they're listed here, the duplexes, the triplexes, the small project. I think we need to split those 2 up, because the design approach to a duplex is so different than a 500,000 square foot mixed use building, And so I really believe, based on my experience and what's happening in the city in terms of townhouses, things like that, that right now this approach will work best, this organization and this document format. And
great, thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, and the samples I've given you reflect that. I wanted you to see the colors, the branding we might use that are consistent with the city and the logo we created and how it all might look.
And so then, just going back to the question I had about this ambiguity in multifamily between 2 and 5. So for something that's 2 unit, would that apply for a lot split? If somebody did a lot split of a single lot into 2 lots, is that?
No, okay. This would be purely for a duplex.
For a duplex, okay.
Duplex development.
And
that could occur on single family lots.
And was Placework suggesting you would differentiate somehow between the smallest sort of unit count versus the rest?
Well, the standards would differentiate between large projects, what we call block scale projects, and small scale, or house scale, which are duplexes and triplexes, just sitting. And the idea is the approach, and this would be written in, as I've mentioned here, the guiding principle statement for that chapter, would be integration of single family design elements, public facing access, and commitment to neighborhood scale. So there'd be far fewer ODS in this section. It would mostly be about, don't make your garage doors ugly, don't bring your quadplex and try to make it look like a big apartment building, keep the design elements similar to a single family home. I mean, there's no way around it. It will be a smaller chapter versus this much more complex design approach to a mixed use or a large multifamily building.
And likewise, would that provide enough distinction between sort of the R3 versus R4 and R3 versus R3TH, and what other variations we have now? But do we see that level of distinction in this document, or?
I think what you're talking about is zoning at that point. And I think we're talking more about building form. Like the block scale development could be R4, it could be R3. The R3TH kind of comes between, when you look at, let's say, a development that includes some townhomes and one block building, then they would use the applicable standards that would apply from the townhome standards and then from that block scale building. And then if you're purely on the small scale side where you're doing a duplex development or triplex, then you go to that chapter essentially.
So the reason I ask is because I look at some of these samples of ODS and they talk in absolute terms about setbacks or step backs or height and so on, and would that not be different for this variance that we're talking about between R4, R3, R3TH, R2, and so on?
No, and the reason why is because, again, this is about use, not about zoning district, and it's also why this document does not have height standards. It has step back based on height or floor, but the zoning code has height standards for those districts. So what's important to remember here is it's not about where you're building, because that is going to be dictated by the zoning code. It's about what you build. If you are going to build this type of building, these are our design standards for it. And it's also important to remember is that sometimes due to requested variations and allowances, a building, a small multifamily might get built in a place you wouldn't expect. So we can't just do it by district. It's about what you build. And that puts the onus more on the developer to say, all right, I've gotten past the zoning, or I'm looking at zoning, I'm looking at what's allowed where, I might have to do this request for variance for this, for zoning, for allowed uses, but no matter what, if I want to build this project, it's got to look like this. So this will not reference zoning except in that introductory statement to say, this is not zoning.
Okay, very good. Other questions?
Actually, I'll just comment. I like your comment on, why the samples look the way they do. I think that there's actually a very good opportunity for the, duplex to fourplex, that this actually will become, a good resource, right? When there's not the opportunity to bypass those. So I think that's definitely, I think it's definitely a plus. With the only concern being that, I can't remember the name of the market. It was on your way to the reservoir.
The Foothill Market?
Yeah. The apartments that were on the front of that were very modern. And so that will be an interesting case of, do the objective standards, is that going to help or hurt as people want to build, flat top buildings, a flat roof with solar panels, for instance. So I hope that's something I would just, again, offer that as a something to consider. Please be forward-looking as well in what those recommendations look like.
Yeah, I believe the Allen townhomes might be what you're referring to. Yes. One last question maybe from me before we segue to discussion and comments, or however we want to go next. So community outreach, while you look at other cities' work and maybe bring some examples through staff back to commission, I'd like to also see if you might be able to bring back some samples of what community outreach has occurred through these other cities. We've had 3 or 4 people here in the audience, appreciate them showing up, but clearly not enough engagement on this, and we'd like to understand what other cities have done and what we can do. I'd also like to see if we can get these banners on Stevens Creek. I see banners for other departments, and maybe that's something staff can think about. Can we get a banner on ODS on Stevens Creek so people kind of start thinking about this and give us input? We don't want to have people coming back in a year later saying you didn't engage us on ODS like they did last year on housing element. So with that, I will open the floor for discussions. If the Vice Chair has been patiently waiting, if you would like to go first.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we actually answered the questions that you had laid out. In response to the question about overall layout, visual organization, yes, I think what you have right now is great. I also have seen the more of a checklist format from City of Palo Alto, and I think one of the benefits of that checklist is it makes it really clear whether the applicant is either selecting one from the list or having to do all of them. Mm-hmm. So whether we end up going with a checklist or not, I think to the extent that we can make it a little bit clearer with the bullets, are you selecting 1, 2, or like only, or right. All of them?
Can I respond to that really quick?
Yes,
just to quell your concern? So I wouldn't expect you to remember this, but in my previous presentation, I did show a slide of what we include as an appendix to all our ODS documents, which is that checklist. It's everything condensed into a checklist, and it's not just for the developer, it's not just for the applicant, it's for staff also. So it goes back without any graphics and just highlights each of the standards, and if there's a selection, those are boxed, but it's just comply yes or comply no for each one. The developer goes through and does it, then staff goes through and does it. And again, this goes back to the entire meaning behind these laws, which is to streamline the review and avoid discretionary discussion about design and make it ministerial. So we will include a checklist in the back of the document where all of this is refined into boxes for both staff and the applicant.
Okay, great, thank you. And then on the question around the graphics and sample standards, I did also have the same reaction as one of the public commenters that on the first section around building form, all three of the diagrams illustrate different things, and I don't know if it's possible or it would be too difficult to combine the idea of daylight plane plus rear modulation, plus the step back. What does it look like if they're all combined, or do they not ever all get combined? So, yeah.
I mean, the difficulty there is that the daylight plane is usually a straight elevation because you're really trying to show that shadow impact, whereas modulation, as in the case here, is three-dimensional. I mean, it's possible, sure. I mean, because they're separate standards and they have almost different goals, one of which is a visual interest and the other of which is shade impact. I would lean towards keeping them separate, but that doesn't mean it's possible, and we can certainly look at it.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from commissioners?
I'm looking at my question, sorry.
So I just want to add to what the vice chair said. I think you are looking for specific input with your questions, and I feel like we are not ready to sort of get boxed in at this stage yet in terms of exactly where we want to go with this, right? We'd like to see more material from other cities. We'd like to have you bring us more sort of landscape of how this has evolved with other cities. And I think the thing that we are, or at least I would be really concerned about, is getting boxed in too early. And then, this was what we heard last meeting, and therefore the next meeting becomes an evolution of the last meeting when we haven't really seen how other cities have approached this and what's worked and what's not. And we'd really like for Placeworks as the subject matter expert to do a little bit of bringing that kind of material to commission, even if it is offline. I understand we've gone through the hearing here, but let's just try and have as much of that flowing through staff, and we can offer input.
If I could comment to add to that, so I actually feel like that this sample is a positive thing. One of the things, though, to address the how is this done in other places, specifically because there are these things about how does this interact with the municipal plan. Perhaps you could select a few case studies of how you would have presented, how this would you're presenting this versus how Sunnyvale or Palo Alto did the same thing. And I think case studies are probably a good way to illustrate that without having to do an exhaustive review across the other documents.
Okay.
The other comment that I had was in looking at some of the other cities, it appears like they have a methodology by which they give you a set of choices and assign points to those choices, and you have to accumulate a certain number of points in order to meet the design standard. And I was curious if staff or Placeworks had any opinion on how that has worked in practice, or even how that has been received by applicants. It just seems like a very confusing process. Just trying to see if there's any input on that.
We talked about both of these in the beginning, and we decided that the point system is a little bit too involved, but I absolutely support the selection of potential requirements, and I think that one of the best places to do that is the facade. I mean, facade design is where everything boils down in terms of truly subjective beliefs in what good design is, and that's one where I really believe we would give applicants, 8 to 12 approaches for your facade design and say, look, either you're going to have to do repeated cantilevers, every 6 to 8 feet, or, everything down to, could be clear or glass balconies or corner projections. I mean, there's so many different ways to make a facade interesting. You need to pick 4 out of these 12 elements and put them on your facade. So we've always used list approaches, but the point scale system tends to be a little bit too confusing. It's that next level of it's still objective, but it goes one step too deep, I feel. But I fully intend to develop some list draft standards, especially when it gets into facade design.
And my next question was, has Placeworks or staff consulted with applicants on this process? And obviously they're the ones that will be held to the standard, so have we done any outreach to the applicants that work with the city generally to get input on this process, or if not, can we do that?
We could do that as staff, but we have not done that yet.
And I'd encourage doing that so that we get their input on this process. Obviously, we'd want to meet in the middle where, we understand their input, make sure the design standards are not going to be in a shape and form that they just want to waive everything. It defeats the process. So at least understanding their input, particularly those that are in the middle of this and will be subject to it. I think that's an important stakeholder. And before we subject them to it, I think it'll be useful to know what their feedback is. Yep, please. Commissioner Lindskog, yes.
Unless she forgot to.
Oh, well, does Commissioner Scharf want to go first? I know he hasn't spoken yet.
No, I don't have anything.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so I had a couple of comments. One is, this is really good work. I can see you put a lot of work into this, so thank you for that. I really appreciate. Clearly, a lot of thought has gone into this, and a lot of detailed thinking. So thank you. Clearly, you've put a lot of work into this. Couple of things is I would encourage you to simplify it further in a few little places. Like I think Commissioner Fung mentioned the roof parking structure. Like, why specify that it should not have vertical walls? I don't know that that's needed. In some places where we mentioned feet in distance, we might be able to simplify it by just saying, we want 50% shade coverage from trees of the parking lot and leave it at that. And then, have our whatever other municipal code that are relevant to it pick up whatever difference there is. So I think it would be good, and yeah, again, the color of the fence, if we can just say, in a earth tone or like, a non-intrusive tone, without necessarily saying it has to pick up 2 out of the 5 design elements from the main building. So I would just encourage us to just scrub it one more time and see where can we simplify it even further without losing any significant direction guidelines that we're giving them. That would be helpful. Like, for example, the window offsets for when there's a proposed building next to an existing building, maybe there's a way to simplify that. So a 2-foot offset seems kind of, honestly, if I'm in front of, if my neighbor across from me has a window that's 2 feet offset, I'm not sure how helpful that is in terms of maintaining my privacy. Maybe there's another way to approach it and saying, maybe the sill has to be 6 foot higher or something like that. I don't know. And still allow them to have windows, across from each other, but create the privacy some other way. And then, yeah, get rid of the habitable versus non-habitable. If it's frosted, good enough. I don't necessarily know that we need to specify what kind of room that is. Let's see, there were some, and then you mentioned the tree height and canopy width, I think in one section, but then when you came to the site-wide tree cover and landscaping, you didn't mention it. So I would just encourage us to be consistent on that. We do care about taller, wider trees, and versus like the little shrimpy trees that we have. We talk about Palo Alto a lot. They have a lot more taller, wider trees, which is a lot more attractive than little spindly trees. And we see that a lot in new developments where we have these little spindly trees that are never going to have the kind of canopy and height and width that looks attractive. So I would rather spend more time on that than on being very descriptive in terms of the number of feet apart that they need to be. And let's see. One other thing that wasn't covered here that I don't know if there's a way to cover it within the framework of, guidelines, but if there's a way to break up the sea of parking or the sea of townhomes by interspersing other design elements, so you don't have 20 townhouses in a row, but maybe you have clusters with trees in between or pathways in between or something like that. And then same thing with parking, so you're not looking at a sea of parking, but it's interspersed somehow to make it more livable. and more attractive for the community. I think that would be a really good addition if we can figure out a way to put that in. The other one is seating. We are a community that's becoming more and more elderly, and we're going to have more and more senior citizens. And that's one reason why we should really be trying to provide more seating and mention it at least, that they should be providing seating wherever possible, especially in the focal point public common areas. And then the other reason is also to create placemaking. So I'd like to see the concept of placemaking put into this, where we're trying to build areas where the community can congregate and feel welcome. So that includes seating, that includes maybe artwork, maybe design elements like a fountain or water feature or an art feature, something like that. But the whole concept of, or like, a giant chessboard or like some sort of interactive feature, but the whole idea of placemaking wherever possible when you're building a common area. So it's not just an open, empty area where no one can sit, no one can play, no one can hang out, or no one's encouraged to do any of that, but we're making it attractive for people to hang out in, and really pushing that concept of placemaking, I think would be really good. So going like in the commercial thing, again, if we have ground floor elevation that shall have at least 60% transparent glazing, I don't know that we need the between 2 feet and 8 feet. Maybe we just leave it at a percentage. And again, for the commercial areas, think about it in terms of placemaking. So, for example, one of the things that we've seen in design elements is where they kind of shoehorn the retail in little pockets that are spread out around the development design. It would be better for the retail if it's clustered together so that it gives the retail a better chance of survival, which is really important in our current economy, but it also creates placemaking. And so I don't know if there's a way to say, if you're going to have retail, make sure that all of the retail is clustered together, and create, again, that sense of place. Encouraging wider sidewalks. You mentioned parklets. I saw it mentioned once, the word parklets, but really kind of pushing on encouraging outdoor seating for restaurants, wider sidewalks or patios with parklets. Really kind of, think about it from a livability and community activation perspective. So those would be my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Linscott.
Can I ask you a quick question? I'm curious about your input on one thing.
Sure, of course.
So in one of my slides for Priority 5, Activate Retail, there's a table for sidewalk sections. I don't think I'm sharing my screen right now. I apologize. Are you seeing that now?
Should
no.
Maybe a lag time on Zoom.
And there's lag time to Zoom, I think. Sidewalk.
I think it's coming.
Oh yes, I see it. Yep.
So in each of these zones, I offer a list of allowed amenities in that zone, and which includes public art, trees, seating, and other places. Do you think this would be a good place to change that allowed amenities into a required list? You must include at least 3 to 5 of these amenities in these sidewalk areas, as opposed to just saying what's allowed?
So, I mean, I kind of throw that question back at you. Like, what is the right balance between what is allowed versus what is must to keep it to something they would actually follow, right? So is it strongly encouraged? Is it you must? Or is it, this is what we value as a community, therefore this is what's important to us? Yeah. This is where I saw that you mentioned parklets, and but I think what would be helpful is instead of just a bullet list, to, since these are guidelines, to kind of write a paragraph about what we're looking for, and then we're looking to create community spaces and to activate these and to do this placemaking, create places where people can spend time and enjoy and interact with each other, and say these are the ways that we would like you to do that, like public art or interactive displays or parklets,
right,
outdoor seating for restaurants. So give more examples like that and say, at the end of the day, that is what we're looking for.
Okay, I think you're absolutely right. And I'll point out again that in our organization image that I put together, each of these sections, one of them being pedestrian experience, will open with a design intent statement. And that's where the input you're giving me is so valuable right now. Let's make sure, and this doesn't have to be objective, this is what you're saying. Here's what we value. Here's why we're creating these standards. This is what we want, are these livable places in our ground floor retail, things like that. So the info you're giving me right now is great. And then also in your question about, well, what is the right balance? What I'm hearing, and I'm learning the right balance right now and talking to you, is that we can do a better job at striking a balance, and it's that it should not just say what's allowed. I'm feeling like what you're telling me right now and what I'm feeling from the commission should be this list approach where you have to choose at least a few of these. We'll come up with the exact number. So it's not so forceful as you must include all 12 of these elements in your sidewalk frontage zone. But as a city, we care enough that we want to see at least 4 of them. We want to know that every zone includes some seating, some public art, an area for public activity, and a micro mobility, a scooter parking area, or something like that. So
community gathering places. So how you have these sections like site design, building form, pedestrian experience, and maybe it fits under common open space. I don't know, or maybe it's a different section altogether called placemaking. I don't know, but okay. I would like to see more emphasis at the end of the day, because on kind of what our end goal is, right? Our end goal is to create a community, and that means people interacting with each other, and so creating those common areas. And so I don't know if that's its own separate section or whether we turn D into that, but that would be my request.
Okay.
Commissioner Linscott and Chair, if I may ask a clarifying question. You talked about placemaking, and just so we understand the goal of it, I mean, common open space could be, for example, on a rooftop, right, for a block level building. When you talk about placemaking, at what level are you talking about that, and for whom, just so we know, so that we can incorporate that appropriately, or at least think about that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I don't intend for, if it's a private area within a development, within the townhouses, then it can be placemaking just for the residents of that townhouse development, and that's fine. But if it's supposed to be a public park, like we're talking to the folks at Harvest Properties about the Panera property, if it's supposed to be a public park, then it needs to be placemaking that is for everyone in the community, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to make one quick comment on the language that the question was raised about allowed amenities. Allowed just seems like a very loose language, as in an applicant might say, I don't require doing any of this, so you might allow it, but I will do none of this.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I
you're
would.
Right. And this is an example of. I mean, the point there is you are not allowed to put other things. These are the only things you're allowed to put. But the commissioner raises a good point, which is we can turn that into you must provide at least a few of these. And this is the kind of feedback that I enjoy getting from the commission. So we can't change that.
And again, I want to make sure you're hearing this in no uncertain terms. Speaking for myself and maybe anyone else that feels likewise, we'd like to see you come back with what other cities have approached this with, right? So before we give you any kind of guidance that goes in one direction on this, anytime you feel compelled to ask questions, I'd urge you to ask those questions of the competitive cities and how they've approached it, and share that material as a reference with the commissioners, so that we are able to give you informed input based on something that works for us, but not necessarily sort of in the abstract. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the other thing I had was this specific plans and conceptual plans. Sorry, was there a comment?
Chair, I thought Luke was going to speak, but I'm not sure.
I was, but I could wait. I actually have a really, really practical question. These are all really good comments we're getting tonight, and they're going way beyond our scope and very likely our budget. So I'm fine having the meetings. I think they're great. We've gotten a lot of comments. But the goal was to come back to Planning Commission one more time for a recommendation to City Council, and it sounds like we're not going to be there in one more meeting. And we only had one City Council meeting planned. So I'm fine continuing to work on the project, but scope of work and budget is always an issue. It's always an issue for the City Council. And I just need to get a ballpark estimate about how many more meetings that we think we would need in order to get a Planning Commission recommendation to go to City Council. Can't answer that tonight, that's fine, but this has expanded greatly over what we thought.
I think what you're seeing here is partly the back and forth from not having that perspective from the other cities. I think if the body of material came in with saying, here's sort of 4 examples that work, you might get more sort of prescriptive guidance. If we're too early in the process and trying to go too abstract on input, I think you're going to see people sort of naturally react to, hey, what really worked elsewhere. But I feel like you've gotten a sense of what the commission feels about this today. If there were a draft, I think we'd start getting into sort of input on a draft. And so the meaningful next material here should be a draft that we can all look at and give input on. Do you feel like that's a feasible next step?
That was the goal next time, was to have the draft. Mm-hmm. And I think if we can have the information with other cities, we can fold that in as well. I think we would have to informally talk to developers. I can pretty much anticipate what their comments are as they design their project, and they're going to hope the standards fit, otherwise they'll waive them. That's what the conversation's going to be like. But I think we can do that. I just didn't want to have this be, if it were 3 more meetings, I would need to have that discussion to be able to modify the scope of work.
Yeah, if we can see a draft, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to progress in this.
If I may also add, I mean, having PlaceWorks on the team, developing and working on this actually brings that expertise that you're talking about. They have, I don't want to speak for PlaceWorks, but Greg can surely tell you how many objective design standards documents they have written and possibly even rewritten in some cities based on application and input and the fact that, standards are being waived left, right, and center, but how do you streamline those to make sure that they can be practically applied. So I think having them work on that first draft and, city staff actually making sure that there are no duplicates, redundancies, or trumping of existing standards, I think you will probably see a workable draft that could be something that you guys could review for your recommendation.
Sounds good. The one last comment I'd add is just let's try and be faithful to the decades of work that exist in the standards. We've got this Heart of the City plan, we've got the Monte Vista guidelines, we've got a couple of these conceptual plans, and some of them do go into detail. So where you can, let's try to either defer to them or leverage and grandfather material and make it
and
objective.
That has been our direction all along.
Okay. Thank you. Vice Chair.
Yeah, I'm personally fine with providing feedback this evening. I have looked at many local jurisdictions and their objective design standards, and I found that actually a lot of them are done not recently. And so even if we were to take the time to find relevant examples, I think it would be hard to find many done in 2025. That said, I wanted to also follow on Commissioner Lindskog's point around just simplifying where we can. And the areas that I found, so in the commercial section around recessed doorways, I've noticed in other cities that they actually give the option between either recessed doorway or a door with an awning. And personally, from what I've seen in very nicely done retail areas, a door with an awning is fine, works just as well, and is probably a little bit less onerous on the developer. And then on the physical point landscaping portion, I think I was a little bit caught on the number of types of plants and categories that we have there. And I'm not an expert in plants, but my gut tells me that this can be simplified a little bit. 5 types of ornamental plants. Why aren't trees in there? I mean, to me, actually, I care less about different types of shrubs and more, is there a tree somewhere? So I think there may be an opportunity to simplify the plant section to some sort of select a few checklist.
That comes from input from our landscape architecture team. So of course, but it's just a show.
Right.
the type of approaches. But I agree, that can be absolutely simplified.
Or even a percentage, landscape versus hardscape, that type of thing could potentially work as well. And then just a minor comment on the e-commerce loading zone. I don't know that it needs to be that specific. It could just be like a delivery or unloading zone. And those were my points, but otherwise I'm comfortable with moving forward to a draft stage.
Okay, any other final comments? Okay.
So my intent, just so you know, and tell me if you agree with this, is to provide some examples. What I think is going to be the most telling, and again, this is going to be a range of dates, are basically 3 approaches to ODS. A checklist only. I can tell you, I think Lafayette right now, all it is a single-sided piece of paper with a bunch of checks, and a document such as ours, a standalone, aesthetically oriented document, and then a zoning code integration. 70 to 80% are documents like this, and I would urge you to think, that is going to be helpful for all of you to see the approaches, but your input right now shouldn't be based on those approaches. It's based on your knowledge of this city. So I don't want you to pull content from those documents because those are based on a certain place. Lafayette is not like Cupertino. So right now your input that is so important is the input you have about this city. It's about those priorities you have. And so while I really think these other examples are going to be important, remember too, what's just as important is your knowledge of this place.
Yeah, I think you're going to be fairly well met on that front. I think the real concern is what's going to work in practice. The other thing I want to say real quickly is looking at not just the 3 formats that you mentioned, but also the content within those. So you've talked about height not being a factor, but some cities do treat height as a factor. So where there are distinctions in how ODS has chosen to either approach or omit on elements, I think that would be an important factor as well. Okay, with that, I think we have exhausted all the feedback we could have. Oh, Commissioner Linscott, yes.
Sorry, one quick comment. In terms of the three approaches that you mentioned, I don't think we should be doing first or third. Like, it shouldn't be like just a straight up checklist with, I think there is real value in, like you were talking about before, with the introductory paragraphs or just kind of a guiding paragraphs. So I do think we're going to end up with some sort of hybrid where we're providing, examples, checklists, and saying, pick from these options, but also a guiding statement. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, and with that, I think we're ready to move to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, PlaceWorks. Thank you, staff, for all the work on this item. Okay, so the next item on the agenda, we have no public hearings. We have no old business. The next item is item 3, selection of an EDC representative, selecting a representative of the EDC for appointment by City Council. Do we have a staff report?
There isn't much of a staff report. The City Council reinstated the Economic Development Committee, and it's a 9-member committee. Originally, they had established that committee to have 2 council member representatives of the 9 committee members. They amended that ordinance in June, I believe, to change that to have 1 council member representative and add a planning commissioner in addition to that. So that is your chance tonight to select that planning commissioner representative. I think it's a quarterly meeting. I don't know what the time is, and it's a term that lasts until January 30th of the calendar year, I believe, or until the next representative is selected.
So the other 7 people are appointed by who?
Sustainability commissioner, all of the committee representatives are appointed by the council. This will be the planning commission's recommendation for their representative at this point. And so their sustainability commission, there's one. I think they're business reps as well. There is 1 council member. The list is in the ordinance.
So it's people from outside the city as well as...
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, when does this EDC actually have its first meeting? Do we know?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I know that the committee members are being selected at this point, but historically, and I'm talking when we had the EDC, the meetings used to occur, I believe, either Tuesday morning at 10 or Thursday morning at 10 a.m. I'm not sure which one.
And do we know, I mean, the staff report says this initial term that you're electing someone for is still Jan 30th, 2026. But
That's right.
But if the EDC is not even taken form and shape yet, we may have barely one meeting or not even that.
Potentially.
Okay. Just want to clarify that. Yeah, wonderful. We will go to public comments if you have any public comments on this agenda item. We're talking about the Economic Development Committee and election of a rep from the Planning Commission for the Economic Development Committee. I don't know if we have any comment cards or someone who would like to fill a comment card after their public comment.
I think that it's good that we're reestablishing committees. We had a lot of them that got canned a couple of years ago. The Economic Development Committee, I believe that it is trying, I may be wrong, but I think that it's trying to help economic development. Is that like retail in the city? Is that trying to bring in new restaurants? Can you talk a little bit about what the EDC does? I know it has been active in the past, but I just assumed that it was doing retail business, because I can tell you right now, we are on the road to destruction of any retail with the SB 330s. It's gone, baby, gone in every city. I don't think that there's enough people that are aware of what is happening to retail. There's a lot of empty storefronts in different cities. It comes from different things. Yes, high prices, neglect. San Francisco and Oakland have areas that were economically viable. Now they look like things from the 30s in New York, because it's just buildings that are completely abandoned, property owners that have just let property sit. And I really don't want Cupertino to become what New York City used to be, which is like the Tenderloin, I knew someone that actually lived in that, what is it, Coldwater, I forgot what that area in New York was called. They're horrible. They're like things that were from immigrant 1910, 1920, 1930. And they're places, and if you've been to Edinburgh, that's what the whole thing in Scotland looked like in the 1800s during the Industrial Revolution. I don't want that for Cupertino. There are things we can do now. I don't know who's running this state. They're running it into the ground. But we don't have to do that and put up with it in Cupertino. And I try to shop in the city. When I first moved here, after I left my father's house, I could come to this city and get everything I needed. That's gone, baby, gone. Now it's like we are going to become, the only thing we'll have in the city is just housing, high rises. And we're going to be like a dead zone. And people 20, 30 years from now, oh my God, why didn't you save the retail? We're losing it at Staples. And I think, I'm sorry, Wiener writes these bills, but we have to tell them this is what we want. It's our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We have no speaker cards in person and no hands raised on Zoom, Chair.
Okay, very good. So commissioners want to make a motion, or anybody have questions, or anybody want to, any comments from any commissioners?
I would be happy to make a motion to nominate the chair for the Economic Development Commission.
I will decline that nomination. Thank you.
Oh, I was just about to explain, but I guess I won't explain then.
Okay, I'll nominate the vice chair for that position.
I will second it.
Does the vice chair accept or decline, or does anyone else want to serve? Or
I shall accept.
We have a motion, we have a second. Are there any comments or discussions? Again, I think this is an annual term. This rotates every year. So over the course of everybody's term, I hope that we will end up with all planning commissioners serving on this thing. And I'm confident that all of us will do a great job at this, just based on the comments that we've all given in our various agenda sessions. I think we have done justice to the ties, and appreciate everybody kind of chipping in. So with that, let's vote. Are there any other comments or discussions? Okay, if not, we'll vote. And we need to do a vote by voice.
Yes. Commissioner Fung?
Aye.
Commissioner Linskog?
Aye.
Commissioner Scharf?
Aye.
Vice Chair Kasolshram?
Aye.
Chair Rao?
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Congratulations to the Vice Chair. We will see how the EDC goes. And also a reminder to our Commissioner Scharf to update us on how the Housing Commission has been going since we did.
I'm sorry, I have not attended yet.
So maybe that will be a future Commissioner report from I believe that is every quarter. The Housing Commission is every quarter.
Next meeting's in September. So
okay.
it sometimes skips. I think there's usually at least 4 a year. Some are close apart depending on the timing of the CDBG cycle. But then there's a gap. So I know the next September sometimes the next meeting.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you, Commissioner Scharf. Thank you, Vice Chair. So with that, we are done with our agenda item 3. The next item is staff and commission reports. Are there any staff reports?
The city has received a new housing development project application on Bandley, and the major residential projects website has been updated. So if you wish to learn more about it, please visit. Aside from that, I do not believe that we have any updates.
Would staff care to share a little more of a teaser on what that might be?
You know, I hate to admit it. I know that they're townhomes. That's all I know. 3-story townhomes. I believe Summerhill is proposing this development in the 50-unit range or so, and I can look it up.
Wait, so there's also an apartment proposed on Bandley by Summerhill. Is that true?
Not to my knowledge.
This might be the same one.
It might be the same one, but now it's townhouses.
There was never an apartment proposed.
Okay.
Yeah, Summerhill does not do rental housing. I know
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Okay. If there's no other staff report, any commission report? Okay, no staff report, no commission report. Any future agenda items? Okay, if there's nothing else, I want to thank all commissioners and staff for this first half. I know we're going to recess. I hope everybody has a good recess. We'll see folks back after the recess coming out of August. So with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Have a good recess.